Okay, so chapter 16 of Took. As Mrs. O'Neill pulled her car into my driveway, she asked me if I'd like to have dinner at her house. My daughter Eleanor will be here, she said. It should be interesting to see what happens between her and Celine. While Mrs. O'Neill and Celine waited, I ran into the house to ask permission. Dad was sitting on the couch by himself, staring into the fire. The room was dark. Okay, somebody go ahead and answer the comments. Why would it be interesting to see what happened between Mrs. O'Neill's daughter Eleanor and Celine? Why do you think it would be interesting? Why did Mrs. O'Neill say that? J. Marie says they're best friends. Yeah, so if we look back in previous chapters, we'll see that Celine and Eleanor were best friends whenever Eleanor was her age, like 50 years ago. So it's going to be interesting to see if she recognizes her and what she says. Barely acknowledging me, he nodded. Sure, go ahead. I don't think your mother plans on cooking anything tonight. Where is she? He shrugged. Upstairs, taking a nap? At 5:30? Go on, Daniel. Don't keep Mrs. O'Neill waiting. He poured himself a glass of wine and went back to staring into the fire. On the way out, I glanced upstairs, wondering if I should check on Mom. I decided against it and ran from the house to the warm car. Was this how it was going to be from now on? Mom upstairs sleeping, Dad drinking wine in the dark. I had to get my sister back. Is everything okay? Mrs. O'Neill asked. Fine. I kept my head turned so she wouldn't see my face. One sympathetic look and I'd break down and tell her everything. At the O'Neill's house, lights shone from windows and wood smoke rose from the chimney into the cold night. Mrs. O'Neill helped Celine out of the car and led us inside. Smells, I figured that Mr. O'Neill was busy in the kitchen. A tall, gray-haired woman waited in the hallway as we took off our coats and jackets and scarves and hats and mittens. While she hugged her mother, Eleanor stared at Celine. She was so pale, I thought she might faint dead away. Celine didn't so much as glance at Eleanor, turning her back on all of us. She went into the living room, sat down near the fire, and began whispering to little Erica. My God, Mother, Eleanor whispered. She's 57 years old, but she looks like she did on the day she disappeared. How can that be? I warned you, Mrs. O'Neill said. Eleanor took her mother's arm. I could almost smell her fear and confusion. Do you think she'll remember me? Maybe you should go sit beside her and tell her who you are. Eleanor looked so scared. You'd have thought Celine was a ghost, which, in a way, I guess she was. A girl come back from the dead unchanged. What's the matter? Mrs. O'Neill asked. Eleanor bit her lip just the way her mother did when she was nervous. It's a shock, Mom, seeing her again, looking exactly the same. I recognize her, but how can she possibly recognize me? She glanced uneasily at the child in the living room. I don't know what to say, what to do. Celine needs our help, Eleanor. She's so unhappy. I fear she'll fade away from us altogether if we don't reach her. Mrs. O'Neill patted her daughter's arm. Why don't you talk to her for a while? Win her trust, maybe. I watched Eleanor cross the room slowly, sitting on the floor beside Celine. She smiled at her. I'm Mrs. O'Neill's daughter, Eleanor, she told her. What's your name? Without looking at Eleanor, Celine said, I'm called Girl. Eleanor sent her mother an anxious glance. I had a friend when I was your age, she told Celine. She looked just like you. It wasn't me, if that's what you're thinking. Her name was Celine, and she lived right up the road. We played together every day. Well, I ain't never played with nobody. I worked every day and half since the night with Auntie. Eleanor glanced at her mother again. Mrs. O'Neill joined the two of them in front of the fire. Try to remember, Celine, she said gently. You spent the first 7 years of your life playing with Eleanor. Hopscotch and jump rope, and Celine jumped to her feet, her face flushed with anger. I declare I'm sick to death of hearing about that girl. My name ain't Celine. How many times I gotta tell you? Mrs. O'Neill reached out to pat Celine's shoulder, but this girl pulled away from her. Leave me be. Jumping to her feet, Celine ran from the room and up the stairs. Overhead, a door slammed shut. Mrs. O'Neill started to go after her, but Eleanor stopped her. You heard her, Mom. She wants us to leave her alone. Mrs. O'Neill looked upstairs. Even with the door shut, we could hear Celine crying. She's so unhappy, so confused. She needs someone to help her remember who she is. I don't know who she is, but she's not Celine, Eleanor said. She can't be. It's simply not possible. I could tell that Eleanor's attitude disappointed her mother. You grew up here, Mrs. O'Neill said. You know about old Auntie. She's turned Celine loose and taken Daniel's sister. I'm sorry, but I don't believe those old stories anymore. Maybe that girl was abandoned in the woods and raised by wild animals. That's no more far-fetched than your explanation. Call social services. They'll know what to do. Mrs. O'Neill stared at her daughter as if she didn't know her. And let the child die like the one before her? Eleanor gathered up her coat and her purse. I'm going home. Call me when you come to your senses. Mrs. O'Neill came in from the kitchen, wearing his chef's apron. Mr. O'Neill. What's going on? He said. Surely you're not leaving before we eat. I roasted a chicken and made your favorite dressing. But Eleanor went on zipping her parka. Her face was determined. Sorry, Dad, but I can't stay in the same house with that girl. It's too upsetting. We were hoping you could help her, he said. There's nothing I can do for her. Eleanor took her mother's hands in hers. Please hand her over to the authorities. Mrs. O'Neill shook her head. I can't do that. I won't do that. Celine stays here. Eleanor released her mother's hands. All right, do what you think is best, but don't ask me to get involved. She went to the kitchen door, but before she opened it, she looked at her parents. I'm sorry, I really am, but there's something very wrong with that child, and it scares me. Okay, somebody tell me, why do you think Mrs. O'Neill is so bent on helping Celine? Why do you think it's so important to Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill to help Celine? Go ahead and answer in the comments for me. Okay, I'm seeing some answers. One of the answers says, because Eleanor left her and Celine had a close bond with them before she went missing. Someone thinks that they might be her biological parents. That's interesting, Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill. I assume that it's either because she just cares for her because they're caring people, Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill are, or there's something that we don't know yet. So that's a good guess, Jamie. We'll find out. As Eleanor stepped out into the cold, dark night, Mrs. O'Neill followed her to the door, as if she meant to call her back. Mr. O'Neill stopped her. Give her time, he said. Let her think about this. For 50 years, she's believed that Celine was dead. And now? Put yourself in Eleanor's place. Mrs. O'Neill sighed. Well, dinner is ready for those who want to eat. Mr. O'Neill went to the foot of the stairs and called Celine. Silence. He called again and again. After 3 times, he climbed the steps and knocked on a door. Celine, dinner's ready. Come down and join us. I ain't hungry, she answered. It's roast chicken and mashed potatoes and green beans. I said I ain't hungry. We'll save some for you, he said. While we ate, I glanced at the empty places set for Eleanor and Celine. I wished Eleanor had stayed and tried harder, but maybe Mr. O'Neill was right and she'd change her mind. I wish that Celine was sitting at her place, eating her food and behaving like a normal girl. But most of all, I wish that Erica was sitting beside me. After dinner, Mr. O'Neill offered to drive me home. When we were alone in the car, he asked me how my folks were doing. Okay, I guess. He looked at me. Okay, you guess? That doesn't sound good. We were heading down the driveway toward our house, which stood out stark and gray against the snowy fields. One light shone in Mom and Dad's bedroom window. The clock on the dashboard said 8:15. Too early for them to be in bed. Mr. O'Neill parked beside the back porch. To my surprise, he walked up to the steps with me. The door wasn't locked, in case Erica came home, Mom said. Dad? Mom? I called. It's me. Nobody answered. The kitchen was dark and cold. Mr. O'Neill went to the foot of the back stairs and called. Ted, you up there? The door opened, and light from Dad's study spilled out down the steps. John, is that you? Yep, I brought your boy home. Dad appeared at the top of the steps, backlit so we couldn't see his face. Good of you, he said to Mr. O'Neill. Thanks, I hope he wasn't a nuisance. Oh, no, not at all. Daniel's no trouble. Turned on the kitchen light and watched Dad come downstairs. Where's Mom? I asked. In bed reading. He went to the cupboard and pulled out a whiskey bottle. Have a drink, John, Mr. O'Neill said at the table. Dad filled a couple of glasses. I opened a can of soda and started to join them, but Dad told me to go up to bed. I started to protest, but changed my mind and did what he said. Maybe a talk with Mr. O'Neill would be good for him. Before I went to my room, I knocked on my mom's door. It's me, Daniel, I called softly. Are you awake? Come in, she said. Are you all right? I asked. She didn't look all right. Hair was uncombed, bags under her eyes, dressed in an old bathrobe over her pajamas. Huddled under blankets and quilts, she had the look of an invalid. Sorry, invalid. Of course I am. Why do you ask? I shrugged, embarrassed. You don't usually go to bed this early. The house is so cold, I can't get warm anywhere but here. She looked around the room. Why did we move here? Why did I let your father talk me into it? She pulled the covers up around her shoulders and stared at the backlight pressing against the windows. Mom, I said, who's downstairs with your father? She interrupted. Mr. O'Neill. He brought me home. Did you see that girl at their house? Yes, she's staying with them. She belongs in an institution. Mom handed me an empty wine glass. Make yourself useful, Daniel. Go fill this up for me. Red, not white. I hate white wine in the winter. I backed away from her, but she was staring out the window again. Do you think she's out there somewhere? Will she come back? Will we see her again? She began to cry. I can't stand this. I can't bear it. I want my daughter. I want Erica. Mom, go to bed, Daniel. Let me alone, please. Just go away. But what about... I held up the wine glass. No, I changed my mind. I don't want it. She lay down and hid her face in her pillows. Well, good night, I said. When she didn't answer, I left the room and closed the door. What was I supposed to do? Nothing was right in our house. Not even me. Okay, that was chapter 16. So, here's my question. What do you think is going to happen later on? Because a lot of you earlier said that you think that Mrs. Perkins is going to be able to help them break the curse. But right now, things are pretty awful at Daniel's house. And so, how do you think Daniel's parents are going to react whenever or if Erica comes back? Or if you think Erica's not going to come back, how do you think they're going to react to that? Hold on one second.